Okay, here we go. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of day it is. I hope it's good to be where you are because I'm really excited to be here today. My name is Baltimore Bats, and this is the astonishing early return of Mud City. Okay, so this morning I was doing research for Baltimore and the next episode, and I was hoping I would get that out today. And I came across, this is the front page of the Baltimore Sun, Sunday morning, April 5th, 1903. And maybe the eagle-eyed out there have caught this already, but this says, artificial cave found. I was like, what? So I had to find out more. Right? So I got the article. Right? It says, extends under Federal Hill and has clay walls. Was excavated years ago. Fine quality of silver sand mined there. Section a storage vault for Rossmark's brewery. A remarkable cave running for squares under the streets of South Baltimore with numerous chambers and divisions, part of which runs under the southern side of Federal Hill, was opened up Friday afternoon at Battery Avenue and Church Street after being closed for 7 years. A great number of persons, with small boys in the majority, explored the cave yesterday and Friday, and in the evening many of the curious carried lanterns into the depths and sat and walked about there. So that's amazing. Just in and of itself, it makes me think of the Little Rascals when they found that cave with the pirate treasure in it. Because it says that it was mostly small boys, right? It is said that years ago, one John Cupp dug there for a fine quality of silver sand, which runs in veins about 35 or 40 feet below the surface of the ground, and his operations extended under the southern side of Federal Hill. Large rooms were cut wide enough for a 2-horse team to turn around, these chambers being supported by walls of clay which run between the veins of sand. Small openings in the clay walls serve for doors between the rooms. About the same time, the owner of Rossmark's brewery at the foot of Cross Street excavated northward up to Federal Hill for a storage place for casks and barrels, and the two excavations met, forming a continuous path from Church Street under Federal Hill to the foot of Cross Street. And there are a number of small boys in South Baltimore who have made this trip several times in recent years. So I guess it was really not a secret to the neighborhood. So the entrance to the cave on Battery Avenue is on a vacant lot, which has until recently belonged to Mr. John J. Knight. John J. Knight. And which has been boarded up to keep out the public. The small boys have, however, known of the cave and 3 years ago dug out the earth until they discovered the entrance. This was the last time that anyone entered the cave until it was opened Friday. When it was discovered that what the boys had done, the cave was blocked in the middle of Battery Avenue to stop the course to Cross Street. The mouth was also stopped up and made to resemble the rest of the ground, so that it was difficult to find. The small boys in the neighborhood have dug since in an effort to locate the entrance, and a large oval hollow about 10 feet away from the real entrance attests to their failure. Recently, the land was purchased from Mr. Knight by Mr. Frederick C.H. Wessel, 400 East Hamburg Street, for a 2-story dwelling, and the cave entrance was reopened. A wall will now be built across the cave even with the pavement line, and the portion of the cave within the lot will be filled up, thus shutting finally the cavern, unless an entrance shall be dug from the Cross Street end. So it's interesting that this wasn't rediscovered. I mean, they say that some neighborhood kids, who knows what the real story is there, but what I'm getting is that when this property was sold to Mr. Wessel from Mr. Knight, and he started to dig out his foundation or whatever for whatever his 2-story building was going to be, he found the entrance to the cave that was there. That maybe, perhaps even, I doubt this, but perhaps even Mr. Knight did not know that the cave entrance was there. And this is an amazing story to find, especially because for me, I've living in Baltimore 12 years now, and in the neighborhood that I am the last 10, I've been to Federal Hill hundreds of times over the last 10 years. When my son, when the intrepid Mr. X was a baby through toddler, it was, a half an hour walk from my house And it's a beautiful park with a playground and, and so I got to know a lot of people actually who live in Federal Hill, right in the direct vicinity, just from our kids playing together. And, now it's been years and years, and I know some of these people, people paying attention out there might remember that a short while ago I mentioned, or at least I believe I mentioned, that was at Federal Hill Park, and there was going to be an episode about Federal Hill Park coming very soon. And so when I started to look at the pictures and, the story that I kind of was hoping to be there wasn't there. But now, now that I have artificial cave found, 1903, and I think I've got the perfect hook for what I discovered that day in April in Federal Hill. And so one thing I wanted to point out, and I'm probably not yet. So one thing I wanted to point out was that Federal Hill at one time was a star fort. So of course we have the star Fort McHenry here. Here's Federal Hill as a star fort, and like I said, there were a lot of forts in Baltimore, as I found out, and some of them were star forts, and this was a star fort, as they show here during the Civil War era. And of course, Federal Hill is the fort with which Lincoln turned the cannons onto Baltimore City, and there are still cannons. If I'm not mistaken, they're like under these trees here. He turned the cannons on to the city of Baltimore to keep them from seceding. Right? Baltimore and Maryland was essentially coerced, for lack of a better word, into joining the Union. So in the article, they talk about Federal Hill going to Cross Street and Battery Street and Church Street. Now, unfortunately, there is no Church Street anymore. It must have a different name, and I don't know what that name is, because when I searched for Church Street in this neighborhood, I could not find it. But I do know where Cross Street is, because I walk Cross Street almost every day, but I want to show something about it, and this is a little fun fact about Baltimore, and who knows, maybe it's this way in your major city as well. But here's a pier for the Inner Harbor, and this is Cross Street here. And so I just wanted you to see, first off, how much more of Federal Hill there could have been at one time. Well, it definitely was, right? Because would have been all development. I'm guessing this is the land that was sold from Mr. Knight to Mr. Wessel here. Because this building, and I'm not going to go into it today, this building is very interesting. They did a great job refinishing and rebricking the outside, so it's not as obvious. And of course, they do lots of good foliage coverage. But there's some curious things about this building here, and it was at one time a high school. And so I want to do more about Federal Hill in the future, of course. But just to show you, here's Cross Street here, right? And if you follow it, and again, maybe I'll try to jump down on the street level. Cross Street, this area of Federal Hill along the harbor, and this was work that perhaps allegedly was done post-fire, and I'm going to be getting into the reconstruction of Baltimore quite significantly in Baltimore coming up. That's why I was researching today and how I came upon the headline, Artificial Cave. This is all very flat, on the perimeter here. Flat. Very flat, very flat. But everything, since it's this way, everything to our left is up a hill, and a steep hill. Federal Hill is steep. And Cross Street here is also fairly steep, starting at this point. And let's see what kind of look it gives us going up the hill. Okay, see, this is flat. This is Key Highway here. And you can see that that's pitched significantly upwards, right? I hope you can see that, because that's why I showed it. So, yeah, I just want to say I've been going to Federal Hill Park for many years, and I know many people now who live in this neighborhood, and no one has ever said a word to me about tunnels, and they know, most of them know, that I'm a bit off and that I have some pretty crazy ideas, and so I'm not ever bashful. I'll talk about them to anybody who's willing to listen, and no one has ever mentioned tunnels under Federal Hill. People have mentioned tunnels to me under, let's see if I can show it real quick, under under Riverside Park, which is this one here. I've heard about tunnels under Riverside Park that allegedly connect to Fort McHenry Unconfirmed, but I've heard about that. I've never heard about any tunnel under Federal Hill. And I spent way more time at Federal Hill than I ever have at Riverside, let me tell you. I mean, 10-to-1 ratio, easy. Easy. So back in April, I was at Federal Hill Park, and I noticed these on the trees. And I had never noticed them before. I had been it's been a while since I've been to Federal Hill Park, because, as I said, I used to go there a whole lot when the intrepid Mr. X was young, real young. That was our favorite place to go and hang out and play. It was a very nice area of the city with a great view and everything. It was a lovely park. And so I never noticed these before. It had been a while, several months probably, maybe, not quite a year, I don't think, but several months since we'd been up to the park and spent any amount of time up there. And so I was really curious about these. So, God darn it. So I noticed there's a wire that went all the way up. And I was like, what? So I started to walk around. I was really curious. I didn't know what this was about. So there were some people, families that I knew from the area playing there, because, like I said, it was a gorgeous early spring day. And so I knew I was going to run into people that, I don't see all the time there. And, so I was like, hey, have you ever noticed those things on the trees? And everyone was like, no. And so I was starting to tell them about my show, because, again, not bashful to talk about my show. And this may have been the first time that some of them heard about it, because I was really curious if anyone knew or had any information about these wires. These are people who live in the neighborhood, really in the neighborhoods. This was really right around the corner. And so I was like, do you think maybe they hook up lights to this for events at night and stuff like that? And they're like, no, the only event that they know about that ever happens in Federal Hill Park at night is they show movies on the American Visionary Art Museum wall, and you can sit in this area of the hill and watch the movie projected onto the wall. But they don't have any extra lights above and beyond whatever lights they have in Federal Hill. And they do have a closing time. I mean, it's dusk. You're not supposed to be in there after dark. So I started looking around the park. And I don't know if that here. No, it's still the same tree. I'm looking up. I'm trying to see. I get a close up of how far up this wire goes. Up this tree, it goes really high. All right. And so I started finding them all over the park. And they all go into the ground like that. PVC. And I'm gonna let's see. I think this might be a good one to do it. I might have to go back to the first one. I want you to notice that. Look at how new these brackets are. And these are pictures taken in early April, so I have to believe this was part of whatever they were doing this spring, up in Federal Hill. Because they did do actually some work under the playground in April, actually on top of Federal Hill. But you could tell by these brackets, and these are the way the brackets look on most of them. I don't think you could see them on all of them. That's new, over these ancient wires. You see the wires good on this one? You can't see the wires well on all of them. But yeah, you can see the wire coming up out of this one. And so I was like, really, I wanted to know what was going on. So I started calling the Parks and Rec Department of Baltimore City, and it took me a few days before they answered the phone. It was unbelievable. I couldn't believe it. But I persevered, and when I asked them about it, they said, of course, that, that's for night. My cover story was like, listen, I'm a dog owner in Federal Hill, and I was walking my dog in Federal Hill Park, and he was sniffing around this PVC pipe at the base of a tree, and I just wanted to make sure it's safe because I noticed there was a wire coming out of it. And they said, oh, yes, completely safe, and it's for when they have events at night in the park. That's why they have this. But, of course, I had already thought of that, and I talked to many locals, and the locals say they don't have events like that at night in Federal Hill Park. So when I came across this story in the Sun, that made it all click. And I was like, I wonder if these wires had anything to do with the tunnels and things that were under there going back night, because that wire looks old. It's rusty and old. I'll see if I can find a good picture of it again. It's rusty and old. Like I said, I mean, it's this old wire that they have up this tree. And And so, I had to, my imagination clicks like, yes, there's no way, I can't wait to go to the Federal Hill Wikipedia. I got them, right? There's no way they talk about tunnels under Federal Hill because I've been hanging out with people, lifelong Baltimore natives and people who've lived in the neighborhood for decades, and no one has ever said anything about tunnels under Federal Hill. So I was like, yes. So let me get to the wiki. And of course, what's the first thing it says? The first thing it says is, early in the colonial period, the area known as Federal Hill was the site of a paint pigment mining operation. So I guess that's the silver sand. The hill has several tunnels beneath its present park-like setting. On occasion, a part of the tunnel will collapse, causing the need to infill the area if the depression is near the surface of the edges of the hill. Now, I have to wonder when this was put into the thing, because people outside of Baltimore probably don't know about this, and I couldn't access them. I've overextended my free limit on the Baltimore Sun, so I could not bring up the Baltimore Sun article about this. But a portion of Federal Hill slid into the street, and this is from the local news here in Baltimore, and you can see it here. And so this was back in December. Do we have a date on it? December 21st. So just before Christmas this happened. And so I didn't, and again, when this happened, I don't remember, because I watched the news stories and stuff, and does this actually run the news story? See, I didn't do that ahead of time. Let's watch the news story and see what happens.
Crews are working to shore up Federal Hill after part of it went sliding onto the road. Take a look. Of course, this is all happening after yesterday's heavy rain. You can see mud and grass from the iconic hill covering part of the 900 block of Covington Street, not far from the American Visionary Art Museum. Now, city crews are now using more than 200 sandbags to direct water away from the area.
Okay, so now, did they say anything about tunnels under this? Right? No. So I was like, and that's why I'm curious about the Baltimore Sun article. I'm not going to subscribe today, so I wanted to see, because they say when these things are updated, right? And this says this page was last edited on 11th April 2019. So I just wonder if this mention of the Federal Hill, the tunnels under Federal Hill, were on this webpage, on the wiki webpage before December 21st. And of course, unfortunately, I don't think there's any way to prove that. And if anybody has a way to, to double check that, that would be amazing. Because they certainly didn't say anything about tunnels under Federal Hill in this news article, but they now say it on the wiki. And so to me, what jumps right to mind is, again, more hiding of the history. But when they got caught, when they got busted, or when, it became evident that these things might resurface, they snuck it in there, right? Because I cannot believe that all the people I know in Federal Hill, none of them knew that, or none of them would mention to me, especially after my talking about my curiosity of old history and tunnels, because we've talked about the tunnels under Riverside Park, would mention that to me. So anyway, that was my amazing discovery today, and it came through, and I'm doing such great work on the next episode of Baltimore, which I was hoping to get out today, but maybe tomorrow, now that this happened, because I didn't want this to be a part of Baltimore, but it was definitely an episode of Mud City, so I was glad to get that going again. Anyway, so I hope you guys enjoyed this one, and until the next one, cheers, guys.